This time last year, the big question was whether businesses would adopt AI at all. Today, they're using it so much that companies are scrambling to manage cost. Can AI generate enough productivity, enough growth, and enough revenue to justify the billions being spent on it? And what happens to all our jobs if it does? This is Fidelity Answers. Hello, I'm Seb Morton-Clark, and this is the series from Fidelity International where we tackle the questions investors are asking of the people managing their money. This month, why is Silicon Valley suddenly worried about cost? Well, to answer, I'm joined by two of our investment team who've recently returned from San Francisco, where they met a host of companies that are building and deploying the technology at the center of the AI boom. Jonny Tseng is a senior tech analyst on the equities research team, and Sam Thomas is a US equities portfolio manager. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Hello.
Now, we're going to tackle that question of cost and also whether AI means gainful employment might become a thing of the past shortly, because I know you both think some of the pessimism we hear on that front is perhaps a bit overblown. But first of all, let's hear about the research that you've been doing in the last month or so. Jonny, we had you in the studio this time last year to debate the potential for AI, and you've just been meeting with some of the biggest names in tech. How has the conversation in Silicon Valley changed in that time?
I think it's only gotten more enthusiastic and more supercharged, and it's always been that the drive of the whole revolution has been models, and our models getting better. Are they good enough, or can they get even better? And I think what you've seen is, since last year, even more takeoff. If I look back in the last month, there's been an unprecedented flood of new frontier models. You had Mythos, you had Fable, you had GLM 5.2 from China, you had Grok 4.5, you've got GPT 5.6. Now, I can't remember any period where the models have been improving so fast, so quickly. And that feeds through in the valley to you have these tools, what can you build with them? Can you build better products, faster products, more productive products? So I think it's just been supercharged, driven by the fundamental research at the labs building better models.
So adoption is no longer theoretical. And I mentioned also this issue around cost, because that has become a meaningful topic, hasn't it, for a lot of these names?
I think the adoption has been driven clearly by coding models, where it could write code which kind of worked but didn't really work a year ago. And now it just writes code that just works. It can just do stuff and solve real world problems. I think if it was a cost thing, the way I think about it is I think it's still early. I think there's still a huge amount of cost umbrella. For example, we're out in the Valley, we met the CFO of one of the leading internet companies who have been in the headlines about complaining about the cost. And ultimately he said that, well, my token spend is low single digit as a percentage of my spending. And it's and this is a tech forward company who will be one of the most aggressive spenders. I mean, low single digit. I mean, if it was 20%, 30%, 40% of spending, then you have a problem as a CFO. If it's low single digit, you can work around this. So I think in terms of, there's a lot of headlines, but if you go to meet the companies and look at the hard numbers, I think there's still a lot more umbrella to spend more, especially as the models get better.
Okay, now, Sam, Jonny mentioned token spending. So this is how much money is spent on sort of one unit of AI work, as it were. And a lot of the conversation has been around the sort of value maxing, so making the most out of that spend. What did you see in relation to that? And the companies, are they worried? Are they really doing enough to make the most out of that value?
This has blown up as a topic really very recently. So we're very early in companies trying to, and not necessarily bring down their budget, but optimize their budget. A few different bits and pieces that were talked about. But one of the main ones is being able to choose the right model for the right task. So an example would be, do I need Mythos 5, Fable to summarize my emails on a day-to-day basis? Do I need Einstein level intelligence to do that? Probably not. You can have
Depends what sort of emails you're getting, I guess.
Yeah, it does. My emails, I think you'd be fine with a slightly less intelligent model. And so companies are working around different ways of doing that. And they're also looking at using open source models where they don't have to pay as much for access to the model as they do if they've got to pay a margin to Anthropic, OpenAI, or Google for the highest quality models. So a few different ways of looking at this.
I think also the value maxing question gets to the productivity part of the models, and people are, you could say that if you're trying to value max and use a cheaper model, you're trying to do the same with less. A more efficient open source model actually the same accomplishment, less spending on tokens. But it also means that you can do more with the same. Mm-hmm. And the question is not are the models more better value or cheaper? Is there more you can do? The question is there more you can do? And if you had a car which could go 40 miles an hour and suddenly the same car can go 80 miles an hour because it's more efficient, you can do more with the car. You can really go places. So the question is, should be focused on the demand question. And is there more work that can be done with the more efficient and better value models that come out of this optimization process?
What else came out of the trip from you? Perhaps you can give us a flavour of some of the sort of most interesting use cases perhaps you saw when you were over on the West Coast.
I think most interesting use cases are actually, not just when you take AI and throw it at code, but when you kind of combine it with the real world. And we saw a bunch of companies which have real physical products, and then they hook AI into it to make something that's greater than the whole. We saw a company called Samsara, which does fleet management. And they can not only track the drivers around, they can monitor them, make them safer, give them tips, give them kind of tutorial videos at the end of the day. You did this better, you did this worse, all AI generated. We met a company, Axon, which does kind of safety cameras and devices worn by police. And the AI can monitor what's happening, and then when they go back to base, it can help write up, do the documentation, do the paperwork, and free up the first responders and the police guys to be out there in the field longer. AI combined with a physical endpoint allows you to do things which you can't do with just a physical endpoint or just an AI.
Okay, so some of those administrative tasks getting picked up there. Well, that leads nicely into the next section, which is about jobs. So our latest survey of Fidelity analysts suggests that the companies they cover are doing more with less rather than actually laying off staff. So tying a little bit to what you were just saying there, Jonny. Now, that's the interesting picture at the moment. The big question, of course, is what will the shape of the future workforce look like? Sam, what are the companies telling you about the impact on their hiring? Are they doing more with less, more with the same, or more with more?
It's company by company. But we are definitely hearing, particularly from some of these growth companies, that hiring plans are slowing down slightly at the margin. So we had one of the large semi companies who said that they had a budget for 5,000 new R&D staff, and because of the work they were able to do with some of these AI models, that was reduced to 3,000 R&D staff. I think it's worth pointing out that these are growing companies, so it's an easier decision to make for a company that is planning on growing headcount for the next few years to change that budget. There are other companies that are being more aggressive with their headcount reduction plans. So Block is a great example. They announced a plan to take their headcount down by 40% at the end of their last quarter. So you are seeing job cuts in some places. Personally, I think that at the macro level, that isn't the same as expecting to see unemployment rise. So you'll have some companies that cut headcount. You'll have some companies that are reducing their spend, but then you have new companies being formed like OpenAI, Anthropic, like Sierra, who we met. This company that didn't exist 3 years ago. It was founded by Brett Taylor, who was previously the CTO at Facebook. He was at Google. He was at Salesforce. And this is a company that does AI agents for customer service. They work with Next in the UK. And so these businesses are going to hire workers, and as productivity improves, there's no reason to expect that the overall macro level for employment reduces. But you will see companies changing their employment plans because of AI.
Okay, well, Jonny, AI in many ways sort of feels quite uncertain, even overwhelming. But we have been here before with new technology coming along that can take on tasks that people do. Is this just another case of a change in the capital labor ratio, do you think, or is it a case of this time is different? And before you answer, I just want to read you a headline I saw yesterday, which was more than 200 economists, including 15 Nobel laureates, warn AI could displace workers faster than any previous technology. What does the data or the anecdotal evidence tell you is happening across the tech industries and the companies that you cover?
I don't think in some ways it's unhelpful to say about as AI and personified as kind of robots or artificial robots or intelligence. AI is simply just what computers have become. Computers evolve over time. They went from abacuses to mainframes to desktops to smartphones, and different kinds of computer evolved. And AI is just the latest part of that. So in some ways it's kind of a normal technology. It's normal technology progression. AI just allows you to compute with concepts and fuzzy logic and ideas, different from how an old computer can compute just with ones and zeros. And what that allows you to do is to address new types of work and automate things in a different way. And all technology has done over time is technology just automates stuff. Steam, automated horses. Computers kind of automated bookkeeping. AI automates ideas. Does that mean there's less people on the planet, less workers on the planet, less economic output on the planet, less economic productivity? No, it's the complete opposite. If you automate stuff, it just means you do things more efficiently. You're more productive. You can create more economic value. You can create more jobs. Just think about AI as it is just what computers became, is what technology has become. What technology does is automate things. That's always been the case. Now, I guess, is there a difference in what can be automated? The Industrial Revolution was about automating manual labor. The IT Revolution was about automating, a part of kind of repetitive intellectual labor. This is about automating more creative labor. As I said, AI is computers that compute and ideas. So it's a disruption in that there's a new bit of economic activity that gets automated. But what is happening is something that's been happening for hundreds of years.
Okay, well, this all brings us nicely to what these developments mean on a macro level. Producer Patrick Graham spoke this week to Fidelity economist Eduardo Chilla about the work he's been doing on the impact of AI when it comes to inflation, employment, and growth.
I'm here with Eduardo Chilla, who's an economist on our macro and strategic asset allocation team at Fidelity. Welcome, Eduardo.
Thank you.
You've just written a paper on AI. What's its main conclusion?
The good news is GDP growth is expected to be above the long-term average. So if you think about long-term GDP growth since 1900s till today, on average, we have had a 2% growth rate. We think that AI could contribute to lift this global average growth by around 40, 50 bips, depending on different regions.
So half a percentage point, essentially.
Exactly, half a percentage point, which might not sound a lot, but it actually is, because we are thinking about long-term growth. So even a 50 bips or 40 bips enhancement or lift is actually a very, very good news for the economy and for markets in general. There are a lot of good reasons to be optimistic about this AI revolution, but we also need to recognize that there are a lot of constraints and things that we need to get right in order to see AI helping boosting general welfare and economic growth across society.
Okay, so the big question then, and in a way the one we're dealing with squarely this month, and there are bits of it sort of just dashed through the paper that you've written. Mm-hmm. What's it going to mean for jobs in general and labour markets over the next decade or so?
When you think about economic growth, there are two important channels. One is productivity, which means how much output you're producing given the inputs you use. And the other one are the inputs. Yeah. So inputs could be labor, could be capital, but the labor component is going to be very, very important. So we do recognize that labor productivity is going to increase, but at the same time, we do expect some disruption in the labor market. Now, this doesn't mean that it's going to be all bad or bad news for all jobs and all workers, but it's crucial that people start training and embracing this new revolution and think about even how our roles are going to be in the next 2 to 3 years. But there is still quite a lot of uncertainty there.
The big boost in a way comes from this big energy build out that's already happening, that markets have already to some degree adjusted to, but you think there's further to run on that, do you?
It's important to recognize that countries that they want to basically succeed in the AI revolution need to be energy independent. So it means getting exposure to energy resources, but also updating their energy grids. And a lot of countries are still well behind the curve on this journey. So we do expect still a lot of investments, both from the public and the private side, in order to upgrade the energy grids and gain more energy independence over time. This is a revolution that is going to affect both white-collar jobs and blue-collar jobs. In a good or bad way, I think we're going to see disruptions on both sides.
Eduardo, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Fidelity economist Eduardo Chiller speaking earlier to Patrick Graham. Sam, Eduardo spoke there a bit about energy independence. There's also a question that's been sort of floating around in the news of late about sort of AI independence or AI sovereignty, as it's called. Let's talk briefly about the geopolitics of this, because there was recently this clampdown in the US by the government on some of their own AI models. Has that changed your calculations at all about the industry?
I was very surprised to see what I guess you'd call a slightly heavy-handed response from the US government to the latest models. The immediate response for anyone who is not a US domiciled company will be, what happens if I don't have access to the latest and greatest from Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, particularly if you're in Europe. Over the next 4 or 5 years, you're going to see more and more of your business depend on these models. And could you be put at a competitive disadvantage by not having access? And so you will see companies look to understand what their alternatives are, and that will include a mix of open source, which is currently dominated by Chinese models, and also some sovereign champions like a Mistral in Europe, which really, I think, got a shot in the arm from this change. It's still early. We still don't have a proper regulatory framework, but that would be the first thing to look at. And then the next question is, with the Chinese open source models, how much would companies want to go down that route, particularly outside of China, and how long does China want to keep those models being open sourced, which could allow room for other open source players to emerge?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of natural tensions here. I mean, as Sam says, the weaker your model is, the more you want to be open source and use other people's ideas as well as your own. The better you get, the more you close it up. I mean, OpenAI used to be open, XAI used to be open, Meta used to be open. As they get better, they closed up access. So one question of China is that as your models get better, if they get better, are you going to kind of close off access and naturally throttle off the open source threat? The other tension is in the US government's response that on the one hand, they're trying to clamp down on US models and stop them getting out, the most powerful ones getting out. But on the other hand, they need to show to the world that they've got the best models and they have superiority. So if you've got a 6-month lead over China and you clamp down Mythos for 4 months and stop it getting released, it's kind of a self-inflicted wound. If they want the world to be on American models, but they can't let American models be out there, that strategy doesn't work. They need to choose one or the other. They can't have both.
Let's stick with the US, Jonny. How concerned are you about the amount that the hyperscalers are spending at the moment?
It's notable. I don't think it's a concern yet in that they still have cash on balance sheets. They're still generating a lot of cash themselves. They're not putting their businesses or their balance sheets at jeopardy in any way. But they are getting to the point where they want to carry on, increasing the spending. Then they need to look at alternate avenues of financing. And ultimately, if you break it down, so far all the spending has been funded by good old-fashioned organic free cash flow generation. But capex has gone up to such a degree that they've now burned that to the ground, and aggregate capex is basically the same as aggregate free cash flow. So they're not generating any free cash flow for shareholders at this point. So one of two things needs to happen. Either the organic business needs to pick up, revenue needs to grow, and they need to see returns on the capex, or they need to cut capex. You need to generate cash for shareholders. But the one thing the market wants to see is not to see free cash flow getting back to historical levels, but seeing it starting to inflect and bottom. And if they can get line of sight to that improvement, then that can drive a tremendous re-rating in these big spenders.
It's worth thinking about the time lag here. So as you spend, roughly a third, and maybe a portion that's going down at the moment, but a third is going on long-lived assets. That takes a long time, 3-4 years to build. The chips and the hardware is maybe 2/3. That's closer to the time of revenue, but you're still talking about 6 months to longer delay. And so the revenue growth that we are seeing today in these companies reflects last year's capex, maybe a little bit longer before. And so the question on my mind when I'm looking at these companies is does the revenue growth we're seeing today reflect the spend adequately such that the returns are good? And at the moment, that still holds really nicely. Mm-hmm. And so should we get to a point where the market really believes in that? At the moment, the market, that's a big question mark on some of these big companies. And you've seen that with, very recently, Google, but for most of this year, Microsoft, Meta, and Amazon really struggling in the public market versus the chip companies. Because that is the big question, is will those returns hold as the spending gets larger and larger and larger?
Are you seeing any evidence for it yet, Sam? I mean, you're invested in a lot of these companies. What are the sort of key questions you're asking them?
The evidence is there for last year's spend.
Mm-hmm.
You can run through the numbers and say, this is what I think the lag is. This is what I think the revenue growth is. You've seen Google Cloud accelerate. AWS in Amazon is accelerating. Meta did 30% year-on-year revenue growth in the first quarter. That's unbelievably fast for a business that does about $200 billion of revenue a year to add 30% to that in a quarter. So the numbers are coming through. As the spend gets bigger, the target gets bigger. Mm-hmm. And so you're sort of on a hamster wheel, particularly when capex raises are as high as they were today. To give you an example, Jonny and I looked at this a year ago and had a view on like what the capex could be. And at that time, I think we had about 400 billion as our expected spend for next year, capex. We're at 800 billion today, so it's doubled. And we thought that was a plausible scenario that free cash flow could go to zero. We got there much faster than we were expecting. And that was driven by really, I think, what the hyperscalers were seeing in terms of the usage ramp up, coding and agentic use cases really starting to come through for them. So it's demand driven, but there's a lag and we'll see what happens.
Is it fair to say you're feeling relatively positive about the next 12 months then?
Yes, definitely. I think the ramp up in Anthropic revenue over the last 6 months has been incredibly compelling. And that leads to revenue for the hyperscalers. And that's driven them to spend on the chip layer. Anthropic and OpenAI aren't listed today. The revenue hasn't fully come through in the hyperscalers, but we see the demand at the chip level. And so that's where the strength in the market has been. I think the next shoe to drop is these businesses are accelerating, and they're accelerating much faster than we thought 6 months ago. The hyperscalers are accelerating faster than we thought 6 months ago.
Jonny, I remember you talking a bit about this last year. The acceleration that can be seen at the development of these models, the technology is undeniably, going through the roof. But to what extent is that actually being picked up by the general populace? Is there a concern there that the gap between where the technology is going and the diffusion of that technology in society, that gap is increasing? Is that of concern to you, or where do you see that going?
I think the diffusion is picking up, but it's taking its time. So if you look at some of the statistics, the spending on tokens is well concentrated in, say, the top 1% of employees within a business. And what you see in the last 12 months is it's diffused from just kind of people who are trying it out and early adopters through the entire IT and coding function. Right. So anyone who's doing IT in a large organization will be using coding tools. You can't do it without, because you just won't be as productive. The next step is to diffuse those coding tools into the kind of broader workforce, the broader enterprise. And the thing I always say to people is that if you can write code, you can do anything a computer can do. All a computer does is write code. If you can do anything a computer do, you can do all white-collar work. Because all white-collar work, emails, Excel, Word, PDF, Zoom calls, all goes through a computer. So what I think is over the last year, we've seen it go from the early adopters through the whole IT plant, and now it will go through the whole kind of white-collar management layer of the company. And then, there are functions like in the physical work of a company, which is where you need robotics and you need physical AI to take off. That's not there yet, but that will come.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jonny, because our next clip is with analyst Kitty Yang, and she's been looking at some of these opportunities around AI in the physical world, specifically with robotics.
So I'm here with Kitty Yang, who's a senior analyst on our multi-asset team at Fidelity. Kitty, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. You look at structural trends in the equity market, plays that will lead to sharp moves upwards for particular baskets of companies. And you've been looking at robots as an extension of the AI play. That's worldwide. Right. What particular use cases have been grabbing your attention?
So for the last couple of years, we've spoken a lot about the upstream creators of AI, so semiconductors, your data center, your chip names. But the question has been, where next from here? How will these benefit us in the real physical world? And our answer has been in robotics and automation.
But we're not talking about humanoid robots here. We're talking about sort of very much actual use cases within industry. So what particular functionality are you talking about?
Yeah, well, the humanoids are very entertaining and good at running marathons. They're not commercially deployed yet. Right. So we focused on the opportunity set in two broad components. So firstly, we're looking at the core enablers of any robotic technology. So you've got your motion control names that enable the precision of movements, and you've got your sensors and the vision stack that allows robots to obtain information and interact with their environment. And on top of that, we've got the application layer. And here we're really focusing on where the real world deployment actually is. And that is in industrial automation and in medical robots.
Okay. So these are actually applications within factories where the robots are replacing the humans. Would you say that was the case?
Automation is increasingly a need and not a choice. And the key driver there is demographics. So in many major economies around the world, the population, the working age population is shrinking and aging. And that impact is already being felt really clearly in Japan, but it's also starting to impact the US and China. And at the same time, economies are reshoring or nearshoring their supply chains. And that involves a lot of uptake in manufacturing demand. So this creates a gap in the market where we're seeing structural shortage in manufacturing labor. So I'd definitely not think of it as replacing people who want the job, but instead filling a gap in the market.
Okay. That seems to be a sort of linear progression in a way, doesn't it? From, automation has been a coming revolution for a very long time in industry. I mean, is this really an AI trade, or is it more just the extension of automation? Where's AI involved here?
Yeah, you're right. I would not think of these as a direct AI play the way that semiconductors or data centers are, but instead I would think of it as a rapidly expanding pocket of the market where AI is a key enabler. We've always had industrial robots. We've always had machines working in factories, but they've only been good at repetitive tasks that are simple and require a lot of human input where judgment is required. With the development of AI and with better technology in sensors and emotion control, we've reached an inflection point where the industrial robots are able to handle much more complex tasks. Previously, a lot of these industrial applications and medical applications are tested in the real world. That is costly, it's timely, requires a lot of input. But now with the merging of AI and the physical world, we're able to test a lot of this in a simulated environment. So in a digital twin of the factory before it's deployed.
I guess the other side of that is that these companies have all done really well recently. Do you think that's just the sort of, they've been dragged along with the AI trade, that anything in tech has been bought in the past year?
There is certainly a lot of AI excitement around, which is why we need to be careful with these. But I do see real backing and support for these companies rooted in both the order books, so the order cycles are turning. We've been in an extended down cycle for machinery and factory automation as a whole, coming out of the destocking period after COVID. So that headwind has faded coming into 2026. And on the back of that, we've also got that structural long-term demand backing it. So I do see fundamental backing behind these companies.
Okay, thanks very much, Kitty.
Thank you.
Analyst Kitty Yang and Patrick Graham. Sam, I'm interested, does any of that chime with any of the investment ideas you've been looking at recently?
Yes, I think there's some companies in the US market that definitely stand to benefit if the robotics trend takes off. But at the moment, for me, it's very much an if. So I'm looking for companies with some embedded option value where it's not the main part of the thesis, but there are opportunities as and when. So we met recently with the CEO of a automotive supplier, and they make radar systems, software, and electrical connectors for the automotive industry mostly, but 10% of their business is in 10 to 15 is in non-autos, drones, data centers, and actually robotics. I think that it's too early to make that the main part of your thesis on any company, but where you have that embedded option value, that's a really interesting opportunity in the market today.
Can you just tell me then how will AI help a company like that? Just the sort of nuts and bolts of what would advance it.
This company doesn't make AI itself. AI will be embedded in the brain of robots and will allow you to do things that you otherwise couldn't do. And if that takes off, then this supplier will be selling many more connectors, many more radar systems, which will allow the robot to see and feel the world around them, and possibly more of their software as well over time.
Okay, great. All right. So, Jonny, I think this might be a good moment to sort of summarize perhaps everything that we've been talking about. And coming back to our central question about costs and also what we've been hearing about the jobs market and demographics from the likes of Kitty and Eduardo, do you feel, I suppose, comfortable about the future demand, and also, will there be jobs, do you think, for humans in a decade's time?
AI isn't killer robots. AI isn't something new in the sense that technology, in a broad sense, has been automating work and making it more efficient and more effective for centuries. And this is the latest wave of this. So you automate tasks by using technology, productivity improves, GDP accelerates. That's good for everything. That's good for everyone, because it ultimately faster GDP creates more jobs, not fewer jobs. That's the big picture. The other part is there are going to be tensions and stresses along the path. Are there going to be tensions in terms of how do you regulate this? How do you control models? Where do you direct your staff pyramid and your hiring pyramid? I just think we'll be sitting here in 5 years' time when we're through to the other side of this, and the future will be bright.
Well, and of course, we'll get you back in 5 years, Jonny, to find out exactly how bright it all is. But for the moment, that is mostly all we have time for. But before we finish, we're going to play hotcakes and hot potatoes. What would you buy like a hot cake? What would you drop like a hot potato? Sam, let's start with you. What's your hot cake?
Hot cake. I'll stay on the AI theme. I think we've seen an acceleration in the amount of software being developed. And when you put software into production, you bring with you a whole host of ancillary revenues that are around monitoring the software. The software creates a huge amount of data, and there's a huge number of infrastructure software names that could benefit from that.
Okay, and your hot potato?
Sticking on the theme, I think one of the interesting things happening in AI is agentic commerce, and we're early in that. But something I think will change in the way we approach brands when you have an AI agent that's picking specifically for you. We've already seen this a little bit with digital advertising, where advertising can be very specified to you, whereas if you go 10, 15, 20 years back, advertising was very TV ad, big picture. And so I would be very nervous of a lot of consumer companies where the moat historically has been big brand, one-size-fits-all marketing campaigns, because I think they're going to come under increasing threat from lots of niche companies.
Okay, interesting. All right, Jonny, over to you. Your hot cake.
For me, it's memory. If you think that models are getting better, there's been more usage, there'll be cheaper models, which means even more usage. All that data's got to go somewhere and be stored somewhere and processed somewhere. So ultimately, it's good for memory. Memory remains tight, and supply demand just remains out of whack for much longer.
Okay, your hot potato.
Hot potato. I think body shopping, and by body shopping, I mean kind of undifferentiated human labor being supplied by kind of business services companies, where it's the kind of thing which is just low hanging fruit for a smart model, which, going back to where we started, can automate things away.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's all we have time for. My thanks to Jonny Tseng and Sam Thomas, and to Kitty Yang and Eduardo Chilla for joining us earlier. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share and subscribe. The producer today was Patrick Graham, with production support from Rachel Reed, Alex Wilcox and Connor Bailey. We'll see you next in September, but for now, from all of us at Fidelity, goodbye.